It is the 1890s in St. Louis, and the feather curler's narrow bench is yours tonight, with its little knife, its warm steam, and its pale curls of plume waiting under your hands. Settle in, and let the pace of the room become slow enough to breathe with. We are in a city of brick streets and river damp, where wagons pass with a softened clatter, and upstairs, above the shop fronts and counting rooms, your work begins in the hush before trade fully wakes. The first thing you notice is the smell, not strong, but layered. There is damp feather, warm metal, soap, dye, starch, and the faint sharpness of gaslight lingering from the night before. The room is close in winter and heavy in summer, because feathers like a certain softness in the air, and so do the fingers that must coax them. In 1890s St. Louis, a feather curler doesn't make noise enough for anyone outside to notice, yet the work fills the day completely. You sit where the light is best, near a tall window blurred by soot and river weather. Below you St. Louis moves in its ordinary way, with streetcars, horses, boot heels, and voices rising from the pavement. Up here, the sounds are smaller. A chair leg scrapes, a kettle murmurs, someone shakes a paper packet open, and the feathers inside make a dry whisper, like breath across silk. Your tools are modest, almost humble. A small curling knife lies near your right hand, smooth from years of use. It isn't a kitchen knife, and it isn't quite a trade knife either. It has a blunt confidence to it, made for pressure more than cutting, and when you take it up, your fingers know where the handle has been polished by other mornings. Beside it sits a little spirit lamp, or a gas flame if the workshop has been fitted for it, and a metal rod warmed just enough to persuade a feather without scorching it. There are plumes in tissue paper, nested like sleeping things. Ostrich feathers, when the season has been kind to fashion, lie longer and grander than the others, with a soft central shaft and barbs that spread like waterweed. Smaller feathers wait in duller heaps. Some are white, some black, some dyed to the deep shades that St. Louis hat shops ask for. Wine, brown, navy, a green that looks almost black until daylight finds it. You don't rush toward them. You let your hands settle first. A feather curler's work is not only to curl. That sounds too simple, and the day is never simple in that way. You inspect, sort, steam, soften, draw, stroke, lift, and repeat. You learn the difference between a feather that wants to open and one that resists. You learn which barbs have taken dye evenly, which have been bruised in shipping, which will respond to warmth, and which will fray if you handle them as though they were stronger than they are. The feathers have traveled farther than you will today. Some have come through New York wholesalers, some through river and rail connections that make St. Louis a busy inland room of the larger world. They arrive pressed and bundled, carrying no romance at first, only labels, dust, and the practical smell of packing. By the time they reach your bench, they have already passed through buyers, importers, dyers, finishers, and shopkeepers, but the final grace, the curve that makes a hat look finished, still waits in your fingers. You draw one pale plume from its paper and hold it by the quill. It is lighter than thread, yet awkward with length. The stem has a slight spring to it. The barbs cling where they were flattened during packing, and when you breathe over them, they shift a little, as if considering the room. You pass the feather through steam, slowly, not soaking it, only waking it. Moisture touches the fibers, and the plume loosens under your gaze. The steam warms your face. It beads faintly on the window. It carries a clean, boiled scent that softens the harsher traces of dye and oil. You turn the plume once, twice, and then lay it across your apron, where the fabric has caught tiny flecks of down. The apron is never truly clean in this trade. Even after shaking it out, little pale pieces cling to seams and cuffs, and sometimes a single barb follows you home. Now comes the small pull of skill. You hold a section of feather against the curling knife, press with your thumb, and draw the fiber along the edge in one smooth motion. Not enough to snap, not enough to scrape bare, just enough pressure to alter the memory of the feather. The strand curls back on itself, soft and obedient, and you pause only long enough to see whether the curve matches the rest. This is why the work is hard. Though the room looks gentle, it asks for force that must appear delicate. It asks for attention that can't stiffen into worry. Your shoulders would like to rise, but you let them fall. Your eyes would like to hurry ahead, counting the bundle, thinking of the next order. But the feather in your hand permits only this inch, this curve, this small decision under the thumb. By mid-morning, the workshop has fully woken, and the St. Louis feather curler's quiet day has settled into its first true rhythm. The bell on the lower door has rung several times. Customers don't often climb to the workroom, but their needs arrive in voices from below, in order slips, in packets tied with string. A milliner wants black plumes restored for a mourning bonnet. A dry goods counter needs curled tips ready by Friday. A private customer has brought in a hat that looked splendid last winter and now droops like rain-soaked grass. You hear these requests as part of the weather. They drift upward with footsteps, then become paper on a hook, or a small bundle placed near the sorting table. We keep close to your bench, because this is where the day becomes real. Outside, fashion may change with a magazine plate or a society notice. Here, it changes by the quarter inch, in how high a plume lifts from a crown, how lightly it trembles when someone walks, how neatly it frames the brim. Your fingers grow warmer as you work. The curling knife is cool at first, then familiar. The warmed rod gives off a faint metallic smell, especially when the room is damp. Sometimes you test the heat with a quick hover of the hand, not touching, only feeling what rises from it. Too cool, and the feather lies dull. Too hot, and the barb tightens too sharply, or worse, takes on the faint brown kiss that means the piece is spoiled. Spoiling is quiet too. There is no crash. There is only a wrong color, a broken vein, a curl that won't blend with its neighbor. That is part of the hardness. The damage can be no louder than a breath, and still it matters. You learn to notice small betrayals before they spread. A weak stem, a damp patch, a line where dye collected more heavily along one side. The job teaches you to see patiently. The room gives you companions, though each worker travels through the day alone in her hands. Someone nearby trims ragged ends with tiny scissors. Someone else prepares a little bath to freshen limp feathers, with soap faintly pearled across the surface. There is talk now and then, low and practical, about a streetcar delay, a price of coal, a child with a cough, a church supper, a cousin working in a shoe factory farther west. The talk comes and goes like thread through cloth. You don't speak during the hardest curls. Your mouth relaxes. Your thumb and blade find their pace. Draw, lift, inspect. Draw, lift, inspect. The feather moves across your lap, section by section, and the plume begins to gain its intended body. A flat thing becomes lively. A crushed thing remembers air. It is not magic, because magic is too quick a word for work this steady. It is handling, repeated until it becomes trust. St. Louis in the 1890s is a city of many hands doing such hidden tasks. Flour mills, breweries, foundries, tobacco rooms, shoe shops, printing offices, and garment floors all keep their own hours and habits. Your feather bench is smaller than most of them, and softer to the eye, but it belongs to the same working city. It has its own dust, its own aches, its own clock, and its own quiet pride when a finished bundle is wrapped cleanly for delivery. The harder part is the posture. You bend toward the work because the feather demands closeness. Daylight changes, and you follow it without quite meaning to. Your neck learns the angle, your back learns the chair. The heel of your hand rests against the bench edge until the wood presses a shallow line into the skin. When you stand to refill water or stretch your fingers, the room seems to tilt gently back into size. And as the morning wears on, the feathers waiting in tissue no longer feel like a pile at all, but like a slow procession, each one asking for the same patience in a slightly different voice. By late morning, the feather curler in 1890s St. Louis turns toward the feathers that have already lived one public life. These are not always new plumes from a wholesaler. Many arrive from hats that have been worn through smoke, rain, church pews, street dust, and parlors warmed by coal. They come pinned, bent, and tired. Some carry a trace of perfume. Some smell faintly of damp wool, old ribbon, or the wooden hatbox where they slept through the summer. You take these with a different sort of care. New feathers want shaping. Old feathers want revival. We can feel the difference at once. A new plume may resist because it is packed flat, but an old one resists because it has learned bad habits. Its curl has fallen to one side, its tip has kinked, the barbs have clumped where rain touched them, and a careful shake releases fine dust that catches in the window light. First, you loosen the old stitches or remove the bent pin. If the feather has come still fastened to a hat, the pin may be darkened with age, and the thread may have bitten into the quill. You work it free without tearing. There is a soft little relief when the plume comes away whole. It lies across your palm, shabby but possible, and that possibility is part of why customers bring such things to the shop instead of buying new. Water must be used with restraint. You don't drown the feather. You pass it through steam, then brush it lightly, sometimes with a small soft brush kept for this purpose. If grease or city soot has settled into it, a gentle washing may be needed, with the water lukewarm and the soap mild. The wet feather looks alarmingly thin. It loses all its grandness for a while, narrowing into a line of bedraggled fibers, and the first time anyone sees it that way, they might wonder how it can ever return. But you know the pause after washing. You lay the feather where air can move around it. You turn it by the quill. You tease apart the barbs with the lightest motion. The room smells cleaner now, a little soapy, a little warm, with the mineral scent of water heated in a kettle. Outside, a wagon wheel strikes a rut, and the sound rises, muted by the floorboards. Inside, the feather slowly opens. This patience is not decorative. It is the job. The customer sees the hat when it comes back alive, but you see the slow middle, when the plume is neither ruined nor restored. You see the damp shaft. You see the uncertain curl. You see the places where time has thinned it. There is kindness in this kind of attention, because you are not asking the feather to become new. You are asking it to become wearable again. Once dry enough, the plume returns to the knife. Your thumb presses near the base of each section. The motion has to account for wear. On a strong new feather, you may draw with a firmer confidence. On an old plume, you soften the hand. The curling edge meets the fiber, and you pull through slowly, feeling for weakness. A good curl forms in silence. A bad pull speaks too late, after the barb has broken. A hat from a careful household tells you things. It may have been brushed after each wearing. It may have been wrapped against dust. The feathers are tired, but not neglected. A hat from harder use carries the street more plainly. Coal smoke dulls pale feathers. Rain flattens dyed ones. Summer heat can leave ribbons limp and velvet touched with shine. You don't judge any of it. You simply receive what the city brings. The human detail sits close here. Someone saved money for that hat. Someone wore it to a wedding, a Sunday service, a visit across town, or a walk beneath trees in Lafayette Park. Someone wanted it refreshed because the hat still mattered. In the St. Louis feather curler's room, that desire becomes a practical set of tasks. Thread clipped, plume steamed, curl restored, trim set back in place. Care becomes visible through repetition. Your own lunch waits in a wrapped cloth, perhaps bread, cheese, an apple, or a little cold meat if the week allows. You don't eat over the feathers. Down clings too easily, and crumbs have no place near pale plumes. When the noon pause comes, you brush your lap, wipe your fingers, and move to where the work cannot be harmed by ordinary appetite. The first bite tastes of salt and bread, and your hands continue to remember the curl, even while they rest. There is comfort in a bench that holds its order. Knife here, brush there, steam to one side, finished feathers wrapped away from damp, unfinished ones kept separate by color and customer. The order saves you from thinking too loudly. It lets the day move without argument. When a room is full of small, fragile things, a known place for each object is not fussiness, it is mercy. The difficulty of feather curling isn't only in fine motion, it is in staying gentle for hours. Many jobs ask for strength in the arm or back. This one asks for strength in restraint. Your fingers may ache, yet they must not become clumsy. Your eyes may tire, yet they must keep noticing. The room may grow warm, yet the feather still needs the same careful pressure it needed at dawn. And when the noon light lies flat across the bench, the revived plumes begin to look less like repairs and more like quiet returns, each one ready to rise again from a brim. By early afternoon, the St. Louis feather curler's work turns toward color, and color changes the mood of the room. The light outside has sharpened. The window shows a pale strip of sky over brick and telegraph wire. On the table, dyed feathers wait in packets marked by shade, and when the paper opens, the room seems to deepen. Black absorbs the light. Navy holds it coolly. Brown and wine colors glow softly, especially near the warmed metal. Dyed feathers behave in their own ways. Some colors take evenly, others leave the fibers slightly harsher to the touch. You learn this by feel more than by rule. A white ostrich plume may open like breath after steaming, but a deeply dyed one may need more coaxing, because the process that gave it color also changed its hand. It is still light, still delicate, yet there is a faint drag beneath your thumb. The dyes of the period are a world of their own, with aniline colors and trade mixtures moving through workshops far from the customer's eye. You don't need the chemist's full language to understand the result at your bench. You know whether a black feather has a good depth or a tired gray cast. You know when a green leans too blue for the trim beside it. You know that damp can wake a smell from dyed feathers, faintly sharp, like wet cloth and ink. There is a kind of listening done with the fingertips. When you draw a dyed barb along the knife, the fiber gives back a tiny resistance. The sound is almost nothing, a dry hush against metal. You pause often to compare one side with the other. A plume must not look busy with separate curls, each calling attention to itself. It must have one soft intention, one gathered lift, as if the wind had touched it gently and then left it there. Some feathers are curled for height, some are curled for fullness, some are curled only at the tips to keep a natural sweep. Fashion may ask for drama, but the work itself stays quiet. You bend a plume around the idea of a hat you may never see completed. You imagine the brim, the ribbon, the angle at which the customer will wear it, and then you return to the inch under your thumb. The afternoon has its own fatigue. It doesn't arrive all at once. It enters through the eyes first, then the wrists, then the small muscles between finger and thumb. You roll your shoulders back, once, slowly. You look away from the table toward the window, where smoke softens the far edge of a building. Then you return. The feather has waited, it has no impatience in it, and that helps you borrow some. We can feel how the hardness hides inside beauty. A curled plume in a shop window looks effortless. It trembles when the door opens. It catches the light on its fine edges. No one passing by has to think of the bench, the steam, the careful temperature, the repeated pull of fiber over a dull blade. Yet the beauty depends on all of that. It depends on your quiet staying power. At times, the shop below sends up a particular request. The customer wants the left plume to match the right. The hat must be ready for travel. The color must suit a ribbon already purchased. Such requests are ordinary, and ordinary requests can be the most exacting. Matching two feathers is like matching two moods. They may come from the same bundle and still answer differently to the hand. You lay them side by side. One has a stronger shaft. One opens more freely at the tip. You steam the tighter one a little longer, curl the fuller one with a softer pull, and keep comparing until the pair begins to agree. This is slow work, but it has a quiet satisfaction. When the two plumes finally share the same tilt, the same soft arc, there is a small settling inside you, as if a drawer has closed neatly. The St. Louis afternoon carries sounds upward through the floor. A street vendor calls somewhere beyond the corner. Hooves pass, pause, and pass again. A door shuts below. In the workroom, scissors click, paper rustles, and the kettle gives its low breath. The air is warm against your cheek. The bench edge is familiar beneath your wrist. A faint dust of feather clings to the dark cloth of your sleeve. There are moments when the work becomes almost invisible to thought. Your hands know when to turn the plume. Your thumb knows pressure. Your eyes travel the edge, catching gaps, flat places, stray barbs that need teasing into line. This isn't absence of attention. It is attention made smooth by use. The mind rests inside the motion, and the motion carries the mind forward. Still, the day asks for care until the last feather is wrapped. A tired hand can undo an hour, so you slow down rather than hurry. You clean the blade. You shift the lamp. You take the next plume only when the last one is safely laid aside. In a trade of light materials, discipline can be as simple as not letting one feather drift into another, not letting damp touch finished work, not letting impatience pass through the fingers. And as the afternoon light begins to lean, the curled feathers on the finished side of the bench gather into a soft, orderly abundance, each one holding the shape your hands have given it. The finished side of the bench has its own quiet geography. Pale feathers lie apart from dark ones, because even a loose speck of black down can show against white. Narrow plumes rest in one tray, broad ones in another, and the pieces meant for the same hat are kept together with paper slips folded around their stems. You do not need a grand system for this, only a steady one. In the 1890s St. Louis feather room, order is a kind of softness, because it keeps fragile things from being handled twice. Your hands move from curling to arranging, and the change is small but welcome. The thumb that pressed all morning now smooths. The fingers that drew barbs against the knife now lift and separate. A finished feather can still be spoiled, so you touch it only where the shaft gives you permission. The air near the bench is warm and faintly damp. It carries soap, dye, paper, and the barely sweet smell of warmed horn and feather that belongs only to this work. You take up a plume meant for the side of a hat, and for a moment you hold it away from the table. This is how you read the final shape. Flat on the bench, a feather can deceive you. In the air it tells the truth. The curl either falls with grace or gathers too tightly. The tip either turns lightly or droops. You tilt it against the window, where late light makes each fine barb visible, and you decide whether it is finished. Sometimes it is not finished, though it is close. That near-finished stage can test your patience more than the first rough work. One section lies too straight beside the others. A tip has curled inward like a question. The base needs a little fullness, so the plume will not look thin where it rises from the trim. You return it to steam for only a breath. Then you draw the stubborn part again, slowly, with the least pressure that might persuade it. The feather responds, but not dramatically. It only softens into the group. That is enough. A good curler learns not to make every part beautiful by itself, because the whole plume must carry one calm line. Your own work disappears when it succeeds. No one should look at a hat and think of the knife. They should see the feather lifting as though it had always meant to lift that way. Quiet, balanced, and light. Below the workroom, the shop has a different energy. There are voices near the counter, shoes on floorboards, the bell at the door, and the rustle of dresses passing close to displayed hats. Up here, you receive that bustle as a softened vibration. It never quite reaches the feather curler's bench in full. You work in the after-sound of trade, where each request has already been translated into material. A customer's wish becomes a feather, a ribbon, a pin, a slip of paper, and then your hands. There is difficulty in being unseen, but there is shelter in it too. You are not asked to speak charmingly at the counter. You are not watched while deciding how much heat a plume can bear. You are left with the work itself, and the work gives you its own companionship. The knife, the steam, the bench, the feather, the quiet test of light. They are plain things, yet they hold the afternoon together. Your fingers begin to feel dry where soap and steam have passed over them again and again. The skin near the thumb grows tender from pressure. If the room is cold, the knuckles stiffen. If the room is hot, the feathers cling too readily, and down settles against damp wrists. A St. Louis summer could make this upstairs work heavy, with the river air lying close and the city heat rising from brick. Even in cooler weather, the lamps and steam gather around you like a small private climate. Still, the work cannot be bullied by discomfort. You shift the chair. You flex your hands beneath the bench once, twice, then return. A feather curler in 1890s St. Louis works with the body held in small discipline. The wrist must remain loose. The shoulder must not lock. The eyes must come back from the window after resting only a moment. The day is made of such returns. When a bundle is ready, you wrap it with a care that feels almost ceremonial, though nobody would call it that. Tissue first, folded so the curl is not crushed. Then a looser paper around that, string but not too tight. A label tucked where it can be read. The bundle is light, nearly weightless, and yet it carries hours of labor. You can hold the whole afternoon in one hand. The paper makes a soft, dry sound as you fold it. That sound belongs to shops, parcels, and careful deliveries. It is different from the whisper of the feather itself. Paper has edges, feather has drift. You learn to hear both. On a busy day, the finished bundles gather in a row near the door, each one waiting to go downstairs or out into the city, and you know the work has left your hands without quite leaving your thoughts. The light through the high windows shifts again, and with it the St. Louis feather curler's task turns from making shape to preserving it. Preserving a curl is its own labor, because a feather is always willing to forget. Damp weather persuades it downward. Crushing presses it flat. Heat can make it brittle. Rough storage tangles the barbs until the soft outline becomes restless and uneven. So you think not only of what the plume looks like now, but of what will happen after it leaves your bench, down the stairs, into a box, onto a hat, and out into the weather of the city. You may add a little support near the base, depending on the piece and the milliner's plan. Sometimes wire is used, fine and hidden, to help a plume hold its position. Sometimes the stem itself is strong enough. Sometimes the secret is not support at all, but choosing the right direction of curl so gravity works kindly. These decisions are small, and they rarely announce themselves. They live behind the visible sweep. The feathers used in millinery are not all alike, and the trade teaches this slowly. Ostrich plumes have length and softness, with fibers that can be curled into a luxurious cloud. Wings and smaller decorative feathers may be stiffer, more graphic in shape, and less forgiving. Downy pieces can fill space but cannot carry line. Aigrette-like sprays, fashionable in certain circles, have their own fineness, though many such feather trades brought real strain to the natural world far beyond your room. Your bench does not hold that whole story at once. It holds the material given to you, the order before you, the routine of the shop. Yet a calm truth sits under the work. Every beautiful object has traveled through other lives before it reaches the hand that shapes it. Some of those lives are human, some are not, and the quiet worker often stands at the place where trade becomes touch. You feel that, perhaps not in words, but in the care you take. The hardness of the job also lies in cleanliness. Feathers show everything. Pale feathers show soot, dark feathers show lint. Dyed feathers may mark the fingers if badly finished or dampened too much. A bit of flour dust from lunch, a thread from your cuff, a speck from the coal stove, all can cling where they are not wanted. You keep a cloth nearby and wipe the surface again. You learn that tidiness is not a virtue pinned to the wall, it is a practical tool. The workshop floor bears the evidence anyway. Tiny down pieces drift into corners. Trimmed ends collect under the bench. If sunlight enters at the right slant, you can see small particles moving in the air. Not smoke exactly, not dust exactly, but the lightest remains of the day's handling. You breathe shallowly when shaking anything out. You turn your head from the cloud. The room smells warm and dry for a while afterward. A feather curler's apron catches more than anyone expects. By afternoon, it may hold pale fragments, loose barbs, bits of thread, and the small crescent marks of work. You brush it carefully, because a finished black plume should not meet a white fleck carried from an earlier task. The sound of brushing is brisk, but soft. It gives your hands a different motion after hours of curling, a wider stroke that eases the fingers. The old trade manuals and shop habits would tell you many little rules, but most of them become useful only after the hands understand why. Do not oversteam. Do not press too near the quill. Do not force a curl through a weak section. Do not wrap before the feather has cooled and settled. Each rule exists because someone once ruined something by learning it. You inherit those mistakes as guidance, and that is one way a trade keeps memory. When customers speak of curled feathers, they often speak of style. In the workroom, you speak more often of condition. Is the feather sound? Is the dye stable? Is the stem straight enough? Is the curl likely to last through a few wearings? The difference matters. Style belongs to the eye at first glance. Condition belongs to the worker who knows what the object can endure after the first glance has passed. By now, your hands know the rhythm well enough that a thought can drift through without disturbing them. You might think of supper, of laundry, of a letter waiting at home, of the weather if rain threatens the route back. But the feather brings you back each time. It tugs faintly under the thumb. It bends more readily than expected. It reveals a thin place near the tip. The mind may wander gently, but the hand remains faithful. St. Louis outside goes on thickening toward evening. The streets collect the end-of-day sound of workers leaving mills and shops. Streetcar bells cut softly through the air. Coal smoke hangs near the roof lines. A river dampness may begin to rise, especially when the weather turns, and the room seems to notice before anyone speaks of it. Feathers are weather-wise in their own small way. They change with the air, and so must you. You adjust the window if it will help, though opening it too far invites grit. You judge by feel. Too close a room makes the work heavy. Too much outside air may carry dust or damp. The balance is never perfect, only tended. Much of the feather curler's day is like that. Nothing is fixed once and for all. You tend, test, correct, and return. And as the first signs of evening gather on the glass, the work begins to show the hidden strain of having stayed delicate for so many hours. The strain comes quietly, as most things do at the feather curler's bench. Your thumb pad feels polished by use. The fingers of your right hand may hold the memory of the knife, even when you set it down. Your eyes, after staring at pale fibers, find shadows too blue and lamplight too yellow. You blink and look toward the ceiling, where the plaster may show old cracks, and for a few breaths you let the room be only a room. Then the next packet is opened. It may be a small one, perhaps a rush repair from a regular customer, though the word rush feels too sharp for the pace we keep here. The paper is creased from handling. Inside lies a curled tip that has lost its shape on one side. It is not a grand plume. It may sit on a modest bonnet, the sort worn for errands or calls, rather than a formal visit. But modest work still asks for honest care. You take it up and notice the little things first. The stem is short. The dyed surface has rubbed near the base. One side has been flattened, perhaps in a crowded cloakroom or under a careless hatbox lid. A few barbs have tangled. You separate them with the point of the tool, barely touching, and the feather begins to breathe again. The work is small enough to be overlooked, yet exact enough to steady the whole piece. This is another reason the job was hard. Not every task rewarded the eye with splendor. Some work restored only what had been lost, and if you did it well, almost nobody noticed. The customer would say the hat looked proper again. The milliner might nod and move to the next order. You would know that a dozen careful motions had made that plainness possible, and perhaps that knowledge had to be enough. There is no bitterness in that, only truth. Many quiet jobs live by making trouble disappear. The night watchman prevents the door from being found open. The typesetter arranges words so the reader never thinks of the metal. The feather curler repairs the droop so the hat simply looks as it should. Work like this is easy to miss because its success is calm. Your hands return to the little repair. Steam first, from a kettle that has been refilled more than once. The plume dampens, not wet, only receptive. You pass the flattened side over warmth, then draw each section against the curling edge. The sound is a hush, a faint dry sigh. You let the curl rest, then compare it to the opposite side. Not quite. One more pass, gentler than the first, and the two sides begin to resemble each other. The lamp is lit now, or turned higher, and lamplight changes color. White feathers become cream. Black feathers lose their edge. Browns grow warmer. You trust daylight when you can, but evening work requires memory. You know that what looks rich under gaslight may appear dull in morning. So you turn the feather this way and that, searching not for drama, but for balance. Your eyes make allowances, learned from many such evenings. In an 1890s St. Louis workroom, artificial light has a presence of its own. It warms the air and sharpens certain shadows. It glints along the metal tool. It makes the window dark, so that the room sees itself reflected faintly in the glass. You may catch your own outline there, bent over the bench, with the pale movement of your hands below. The city beyond becomes less visible, but not absent. It hums behind the reflection. There is also the matter of pay, though we keep the thought gentle. Fine work was not always finely paid. Women's trades in millinery and trimming often depended on speed, season, reputation, and the demands of employers or customers. A feather curler's skill could be real and still be treated as small, because the object was decorative, because the hand was expected to be patient, because beauty was often built from labor made quiet. You feel that in the length of the day. Yet the work gives its own measure. A poor curl cannot be argued into excellence. A well-restored plume stands where it should. The material answers honestly. That honesty can be comforting, especially when the human arrangements around the work are less simple. You do what can be done with the feather before you. You make the next motion clean. You let the finished piece speak in its own soft way. Now and then someone from below climbs the stairs. The steps creak in a known pattern. A question is asked at the doorway. Not loudly. Is the black plume ready? Can the blue tips be wrapped tonight? Did the customer leave the old pin? You answer without ceremony, because the room is still full of fragile things. Voices seem to lower themselves here. Even practical speech takes on the hush of the materials. A rapt order is carried down. You hear the footsteps retreat. For a while after, the space it occupied on the finished table looks oddly bright. Work leaving the room always makes room for more work, but it also gives the day a little shape. Something has passed from uncertain to done. Something has moved from hand to paper to stare. You return to the bench, and the next feather waits without complaint. The evening lamp steadies, and the St. Louis feather curler's room becomes smaller, warmer, and more inward, as though the whole city has narrowed to the circle of light around your hands. Inside that circle, texture becomes the main language. The quill is smooth, but not perfectly so. It has little ridges under the nail. The barbs are soft when stroked with their lie, resistant when touched against it. A damp feather feels cool before it feels light. A dry feather can almost vanish between the fingers until the stem reminds you it is there. The knife handle has a worn place that fits the side of your finger. You may have a small cushion or folded cloth near the edge of the bench to protect certain plumes while you work their tips. You may rest a stem across it so the finished curl doesn't flatten. The cloth carries the smells of the room, not unpleasant, only used. Soap, steam, faint dye, dust, human hands. A workshop has a scent that comes from many ordinary days layered together, and after enough time, that scent means beginning again. The feathers themselves have moods, if we may call them that softly. Some spring open after steam as though grateful. Some remain stringy until dried and brushed. Some curl into too tight a ring if the pressure is careless. Some refuse symmetry, and you must make a companionable asymmetry instead, the sort that looks natural once placed on a hat. Good work isn't always making things identical. Often it is making their differences rest together. A pair of plumes for a walking hat lies before you now. They are not large, but they must frame the crown with a restrained sweep. You hold one, then the other. One curves left more easily. The other has a slightly fuller tip. The task is to make them appear intended for each other. You warm the stubborn one first, give it the longer curl, then soften the fuller one at the edge. Little by little, they begin to speak the same quiet language. You stop often to let them cool. This matters. A curl judged while warm may not be the curl that remains. So you lay the plume aside and turn to a bit of trimming, or clean the blade, or prepare tissue. The waiting is part of the work, not an interruption. A sleeping listener may understand this better than a hurried one. Some things reveal themselves only after being left alone for a few breaths. The shop clock marks the hour with a small authority. It doesn't startle. It simply states that time has moved. You may not know the exact minute without looking, but your body has kept count in another way. Morning belonged to opening and softening. Noon belonged to repairs and bread. Afternoon belonged to color, matching, and endurance. Evening belongs to finishing without letting tiredness enter the materials. There is a quiet craft in knowing when to stop. Overworked feathers lose life. A curl repeated too often becomes fussy, and fussiness wakes the eye when the goal is grace. You learn to leave a little looseness where looseness belongs. The plume should not look carved. It should look lifted. Your hand must withdraw before the work becomes self-conscious, and that restraint may take years to learn. Outside, the city darkens by degrees. Gas lights appear along the street. Shop windows glow. The river, if you were near enough to see it, would be turning its broad surface into a dark ribbon under the evening sky. In your room, the dark reaches only the corners. The bench remains bright. Feathers nearest the lamp shine at their edges, and loose down casts tiny shadows that seem too delicate to exist. Another worker yawns softly, then apologizes without needing to. Tiredness is no offense here. It is part of the day. You hear a chair shift, a drawer close, the clink of a cup set down. Someone mentions the weather. Someone says, "The damp will be in the feathers tomorrow, if the rain holds." The talk fades again, because talking takes a portion of attention, and attention is still needed until the last order is safe. A St. Louis feather curler in the 1890s lived by these seasons within seasons. There was the season of fashion, when certain hats demanded larger plumes or particular colors. There was the season of weather, damp and dry, cold and heat. There was the season of the working day, with its morning clarity and evening fatigue. And there was the tiny season of each feather, from packed flatness to steam, from steam to curl, from curl to rest. You work inside all of them. That is why the job is more than a pretty trade. It is a small negotiation with time. The feather remembers how it was grown, how it was packed, how it was dyed, how it was worn, and how the weather touched it. Your task is to add another memory, a curve made by hand, firm enough to last, gentle enough not to wound. The phrase sounds simple, made by hand, but here it means the whole body lending itself to smallness. Eyes narrowing, breath slowing, thumb pressing, wrist turning, shoulder easing back, feet planted under the chair, mind returning after each drift. The hand is never only the hand. It carries the day's fatigue, the room's warmth, the worry kept quiet, the skill learned through repetition, and the hope that the finished work will leave cleanly. And as the evening deepens, the workroom begins to turn from production toward the careful rituals that let tomorrow begin without confusion. The first ritual is sorting what remains. Unfinished feathers must not be mistaken for finished ones. Damp pieces must not be wrapped as though dry. Repairs awaiting a customer's decision must keep their notes. You read each slip, and the paper edges feel soft from handling. Names, colors, instructions, promised days. The writing may be hurried, but the meaning must be clear enough for morning. Confusion in a feather room can crush time as surely as a heavy hand crushes a plume. You place the unfinished work where air can reach it. A feather that has taken steam late in the day needs a gentle resting place. You don't trap warmth inside tissue. You don't crowd it beneath heavier pieces. The table has its little zones, known without labels after enough use. Here for drying, here for matched pairs, here for repairs, here for new curling, here for scraps that still may serve a small trim. Nothing in the room is worthless too quickly. A short feather may fill a gap. A trimmed piece may test dye or heat. A broken stem may teach what went wrong. Even scraps help your hand remember pressure. You do not hoard disorder, but you also do not throw away usefulness before understanding it. Many old workshops carried this habit, born from tight margins and practical respect for material. Waste had to earn its leaving. You gather the loose down with a dampened cloth, moving slowly so it doesn't lift and scatter. It clings to the fabric in little pale islands. The bench emerges from beneath the day's evidence. A clean surface at evening has a different feeling from a clean surface at morning. Morning cleanliness is readiness. Evening cleanliness is release. Both matter, and both are made by the same hands that curled the feathers. The knife is wiped and set down. Its edge, though not sharp like a cutting blade, must stay smooth enough to draw without snagging. You inspect it under lamplight, turning it until the metal shows any roughness. A burr could tear a fiber tomorrow. A stain could mark a pale feather. Tools in a quiet trade are not many, so each one becomes familiar. You care for it because it has been carrying your motions all day. The warmed rod cools. The kettle is moved aside. Water darkened by use is emptied where it belongs. The room's smells shift as heat fades. Less steam now. More paper. More wood. A faint coldness begins at the window, even if the room itself remains warm. You can feel the day loosening. Not ending in a grand way, but loosening, thread by thread. Downstairs, the public part of the shop may still have its own closing tasks. Accounts. Sweeping. A final customer. A parcel set aside for early delivery. Up here, the feather curler's closing is more intimate. You look for danger to fragile things. A window left open too far. A lamp too near tissue. A packet resting under weight. A finished curl touching damp cloth. The room is quiet, but it still asks to be left properly. You check the wrapped orders once more. Black plume, ready. Blue tips resting. White ostrich repair, drying till morning. Brown pear, matched and wrapped. The names and descriptions pass through your mind in a low internal murmur. This is not reciting for show. It is how the handover to tomorrow happens when tomorrow's first worker may be you. Tired in a different way, needing the kindness of tonight's order. The St. Louis night gathers on the other side of the glass. Street noise is thin, but do not vanish. A late wagon rolls past. Somewhere, a door closes hard enough to send a dull sound upward. The gaslight inside trembles very slightly. You lift one last loose feather from the floor, where it has caught near the chair leg. It weighs almost nothing. Still, you notice it. After a day of this work, noticing has become a kind of breathing. There is a tenderness in the cleanup that no customer sees. It belongs to the worker and the room. The bench that held effort now receives care. The tools that shaped delicate things are themselves placed gently away. The feathers that will continue tomorrow are given space, as if sleep were possible for them too. We remain with you in that small attention because it tells the truth of the job as clearly as any finished hat. And when the workroom has been put into its evening order, your own body begins to speak more clearly than it could while the feathers still needed you. Your neck knows the day first. It releases in slow stages as you straighten. Your hands, no longer required to be precise, feel suddenly larger and less certain. The thumb that pressed the knife may pulse faintly. The eyes that measured curl after curl find relief in looking at broader shapes. The door, the window, the dark square of a cabinet, the long line where wall meets ceiling. Wider seeing feels like rest. You brush your sleeves again, though there will always be one more speck. A pale barb clings near the cuff, and you pick it free with a motion still careful from habit. It floats down before you can catch it. That is the nature of the material. It is always half willing to become air. You smile perhaps, not broadly, only with the small patience of someone who has spent all day learning the same lesson. The apron comes off slowly. Its ties may have made shallow marks at the waist. You shake it where shaking is allowed, away from the finished work, and fold it for morning. The fabric is coarse compared with the feathers, and after hours of touching softness, its roughness feels almost surprising. You notice your own hands against it, the skin a little dry, a little reddened, with traces of soap and warmth held in the lines. A basin may wait for washing. The water is cooler now. You rub your fingers gently, and the water clouds with the day's dust. Soap slips over the knuckles, under the nails, around the thumb that has done so much quiet pressing. There may be a faint stain from dye near the cuticle, stubborn and small. You do not scrub harshly. The hands have earned gentleness too. The hard part of being a feather curler was not that each moment was heavy, it was that each moment was light, and still the accumulation weighed on you. A single curl is nothing. 100 curls become the wrist. A small decision is nothing. A day of small decisions becomes the eyes. A feather is nearly weightless. A bundle of responsibility can still be felt when you lay it down. We can sit with that thought without making it sharp. Many quiet jobs carry this same pattern. Their burdens are measured in repetition, posture, attention, and the need to begin again before the last motion has fully left the body. The St. Louis feather curler knows this in the ordinary way, through the chair, the lamp, the bench, and the breath taken after finishing one more piece. You gather your things. Perhaps there is a shawl, a hat of your own, plain compared with the decorated work passing through the shop. Perhaps there is a small bag, a lunch cloth folded empty, a pair of gloves if the weather asks for them. The room looks different from standing height. The benches seem lower. The finished parcels seem more private. The feathers resting for morning lie in their papers like pale weather kept indoors. Before leaving, you glance once more at the drying table. This last look is part habit, part care. A white plume, still not fully ready for wrapping, rests with its barbs spread softly. In lamplight, it looks warmer than it will in day. You know morning will tell the final truth. That knowledge helps you leave it alone. Not every task should be completed at night. Some work is better trusted to the next light. The door to the stair opens, and cooler air touches your face. The smell changes at once. Less feather, more building, more street, more coal smoke, and damp wool from coats below. Wooden steps receive your weight. After hours of sitting, walking feels at first like another trade entirely. The body remembers its larger movements. Knee, foot, hand on rail, the faint creak of descent. As you go down, the shop's public room may still glow with lamps. Hats stand on forms, each one composed and silent. Ribbons lie in controlled loops. A glass case reflects light along its edges. The curled feathers that left your bench now belong to this world of display, where their hidden labor is folded into appearance. You may recognize one plume by its curve, though no one else would know it as yours. There is something gentle in passing by your own finished work without claiming it aloud. The feather rests on a hat. The hat waits for a customer, and the customer will carry it into streets, parlors, churches, trains, or visits you will never see. Your hand will travel farther than you do, carried in a curve. That is one of the quiet mysteries of workshop labor. The maker remains, while the made thing moves. Outside, the St. Louis evening has thickened into lamps and shadows, and the feather curler's day follows you into the street, in the faint scent of steam still caught in your sleeves. The pavement holds the day's chill or heat, depending on the season. If it is winter, the air bites lightly at damp fingers. If it is summer, the brick buildings seem to breathe stored warmth after sunset. Horses pass with harness leather creaking. Streetcar tracks shine dull under the lamps. Somewhere nearby, a newspaper boy calls, and the sound thins as it travels along the street. You step into all of it slowly, carrying the posture of the bench for a little while longer. The city after work is not silent, but it asks less from your eyes. You no longer have to read each fiber. You can let signs blur, windows glow, faces pass. The ears take over. Wheels on stone, a bell from a car, voices from a doorway, the soft brush of your own skirt or coat as you walk. Even the smell is broader now. Coal smoke, damp earth, bakery warmth, stable straw, river air, and the faint industrial breath of a city built on moving goods. St. Louis in the 1890s was full of such passages from indoor precision to outdoor noise. Printers came out with ink under their nails. Seamstresses came out with thread on their sleeves. Clerks came out blinking from ledgers. Brewery workers carried malt and yeast in their clothes. You carry feather dust, soap, and the invisible memory of curls. Each worker leaves a private atmosphere behind and enters the shared evening. Your own hat may be practical, and perhaps you notice it's trimmed differently because of your trade. A feather on someone else's brim catches your eye. You see at once whether it has been well kept. A plume passing beneath a lamp reveals a crushed side, a good curl, a cheap dye, or a careful hand. Work changes the way the world appears. Once you have learned to shape a thing, you cannot wholly stop seeing how things are shaped. There is no need to speak of this to anyone. It can remain a private seeing. A woman steps from a shop doorway with a dark plume lifting from her hat, and you notice the stem has been cleverly hidden. A girl hurries past with a small feather pinned at too steep an angle, and you know it will not hold through rain. These observations drift through you and fade. The day is over, but the skill keeps softly awake. If you ride a streetcar, the seat feels hard after the work chair, though the relief of not holding your shoulders forward is plain. The car smells of wool, damp leather, metal, and other people's long days. A strap swings overhead. Coins clink near the conductor. The city moves past in squares of lamplit window and dark shop front. Your hands rest in your lap, and for the first time in many hours they are allowed to be still without waiting for the next plume. Stillness after fine work can feel strange. The fingers may twitch slightly, as though finishing an unseen curl. The thumb may press against the side of the forefinger, remembering the tool. You let that memory spend itself. The motion will be there tomorrow. It does not need to be held tonight. Outside the car, St. Louis rolls by with its warehouses, houses, church towers, yards, and the distant sense of the river carrying barges and reflections. At home, or in a rented room, or wherever the day releases you, the work leaves in layers. First the outer clothes, then the smell of the shop, softened by ordinary rooms, then the posture, slowly. Your supper may be simple and warm. A bowl, bread, tea, stew, whatever the household allows. The hands that held feathers now hold a spoon, a cup, a piece of bread. Heavier objects feel oddly generous. You may wash again before bed. Warm water loosens the last stiffness. If a small stain from dye remains, it can wait. If a bit of down has followed you despite every brushing, it may appear on a sleeve, a chair, or the edge of a basin like a tiny pale signature. You remove it and think, perhaps of the drying table, of the white plume that must be judged in mourning, of the blue tips wrapped with just enough room. We stay close to the softness of that thought, because the worker's mind often returns to unfinished tasks without wanting to, not with alarm, not with worry sharp enough to wake the heart, more like a lamp left low in another room. Did the damp feather have enough air? Was the brown pear placed far enough from the window? Did the repaired plume hold its second curl? The questions pass slowly, and most of them answer themselves with memory. The workroom was left in order. You saw it. The knife was wiped. The kettle was moved. The white plume was resting. The packets were separated. Tomorrow will have its own problems, but they do not need solving in the dark. Tonight, the body can release what the mind keeps touching. That is one of the hardest skills any quiet worker learns, to leave the work where it belongs. And while the city settles into its late noises, your sleep approaches through the same patience the feathers required all day. Morning, when it comes again, doesn't break the trade open all at once. It returns by small degrees. A pale line at the curtain, a floorboard cooling underfoot, the first sound of someone stirring in another room. The body remembers yesterday, before the mind names it. Hands flex, shoulders test themselves. The thumb is tender, perhaps, but willing. The feather curler's day in 1890s St. Louis begins again, with ordinary motions, before the first plume is touched. On the way back to the shop, the city has a different face. Morning carts carry milk, bread, cloth, parcels, and coal. Street sweepings gather near gutters. The air smells damp and raw before the sun warms brick. Shopkeepers lift shutters. A horse snorts steam into cool air. You pass windows where hats sit in display, their feathers still as sleeping birds in the first light, and you know how much handling lies behind that stillness. The stair to the workroom creaks in the familiar places. At the top, the air is cooler than it will be by noon. It holds yesterday's faint scent, paper, feather, soap, and dry wood, waiting to be warmed again. You set down your things. You tie the apron. You look first, before touching anything. Looking is part of opening the room. It tells you whether night has disturbed what evening arranged. The white plume on the drying table has opened. Not perfectly, perhaps, but enough to make you hopeful. In morning light, its true color returns. The cream cast of lamplight is gone, and the feather shows its honest pale tone, with a slightly tired place near the tip. You lift it carefully and let it hang in the air. It needs a little more work, but not much. That is a kind beginning. The room fills slowly with other workers and the small sounds of arrival. A chair pulled out, a drawer opened, a kettle set to heat. Someone coughs lightly and then laughs under the breath at the weather. The first paper packet is untied. We are back where the trade lives. Not in grand events, but in the readiness of tools, the condition of materials, and the steady return of attention. This morning's first task is to finish what night wisely left alone. You pass the white plume through steam, brief and careful. The air warms around your hand. The feather loosens. You find the tired place near the tip and draw it once along the curling knife. Too much would make it look false. Too little would leave it limp beside the rest. The right amount is felt more than chosen, a pressure known in the fingers before the mind has time to measure it. The curl takes. You let it cool. Then you hold the plume beside its mate, if there is one, or against the shape it must serve. The line is acceptable now, soft and clean. You wrap it in tissue, leaving space for the curve, and mark it ready. A small piece of yesterday has crossed into today. The feeling is modest, but real. The day has found its first settled note. There are new feathers waiting, and among them a packet from a wholesaler that carries the dry smell of travel. The paper is thicker, the string tighter, the label written in a business hand. Inside, the plumes are compressed together, their barbs pressed flat by the journey. They look disappointing at first. Many good materials do. The work begins by believing the flat bundle may contain lift. You separate the feathers one by one. The stems click softly against each other. Some plumes are longer, some shorter, some fuller along one side. Sorting is slow, but it saves trouble later. You group by length, fullness, color, and condition. A feather curler who skips sorting pays for it in mismatched work. At the St. Louis bench, patience spent early becomes ease later in the day. The new plumes need airing. You spread them where they won't be crushed. The room seems to grow softer as they open slightly. Even uncurled, they change the light around them. A broad ostrich plume has a way of catching air, making its own small weather when moved. You lift one, and the tip trembles after your hand stops. That delayed motion is part of what fashion loves, and part of what makes the work difficult. The feather never quite behaves like a still object. Steam wakes the packed feathers. The fibers loosen with a faint shiver. You brush lightly, following the natural lie. A plume that looked narrow becomes fuller. A dull one gains volume. The smell of packing fades, replaced by warmth and damp. Your hands move through the same sequence again, but repetition does not make the feathers identical. Each one returns from packing in its own manner. A customer might think the curl is the decoration, but before curl comes restoration from storage and travel. Trade compresses things. Work opens them. That is true in a simple physical way here, with feathers flattened by paper and transit, and it is true in a quieter human way too. The bench asks you to open your attention each morning, even if yesterday pressed it flat. You begin with the strongest plume from the bundle. It will set the pattern for the group. The shaft is sound. The fibers are generous. You decide on a broad, relaxed curl suited for a hat meant to look full, rather than sharp. The knife meets the feather. Your thumb presses and draws. The first curl springs a little too eagerly. You soften the next section, adjusting pressure. By the third, the hand and feather have reached agreement. That agreement is one of the pleasures of the trade. Not excitement, not surprise, something quieter. You learn what the material wants, and the material accepts what the order requires. Between those two, your skill finds a path. It doesn't announce itself, it just works. and the plume begins to change under your hand. By mid-morning, the new bundle has become a row of half-shaped plumes, and the 1890s St. Louis feather curler is once again deep inside the measured rhythm of steam, pull, rest, and compare. The mid-morning room has a brighter sound than early morning. Everyone is properly awake now. The kettle is active, the street below has filled, the work table receives more light, and imperfections become easier to see. You notice uneven dye near a stem, a broken barb hidden beneath fuller fibers, a slight twist that will affect how the plume sits. None of these things is a disaster. They are simply the facts the hand must answer. You take the plume with the twisted stem and turn it slowly. A stem can be persuaded only so far. If forced, it will split or kink, and then all its beauty becomes troublesome. So you plan the curl to honor the twist instead of fighting it. Perhaps the plume will suit the left side of a hat rather than the right. Perhaps it can be paired with another that leans similarly. Good workmanship includes knowing when the material's flaw is really a direction. The St. Louis millinery trade depends on such quiet judgment. A shop cannot throw aside every imperfect piece, nor can it send out work that looks careless. Between waste and pride lies the skilled worker's practical imagination. You see what a feather can still become. You decide where it belongs. You make usefulness graceful, if grace is possible, and if not, you make it neat. Your hands sort again. This one for a side trim, this one for a fuller crown, this one for repair stock, this one perhaps too weak for the customer's first request, but useful for a smaller order. The labels and piles shift as understanding improves. Sorting is not only a beginning task, it continues as the day teaches you more. The bench is a conversation, and you revise your answers. A small pot of paste or gum may sit in the room for other trimming work, giving off a faint, plain smell when opened. Ribbon nearby smells of fabric and storage. Hat bodies, if present, bring straw, felt, buckram, or velvet into the air. Your feather work touches these neighboring trades without becoming them. The milliner shapes the hat, the trimmer composes its visible arrangement, the feather curler prepares one of the most delicate parts of that composition, making movement ready for design. Movement is the secret word, though no one may say it. A feather is valued because it moves even when nearly still. It trembles when the wearer turns. It stirs when a door opens. It softens the outline of the head and hat, making a little living edge against the air. Your curls must allow that movement, not lock it away. A plume made too stiff loses the very quality that made it worth curling. So you test by motion. You lift the plume and gently shake it once. Not hard, just enough to see whether the barbs fall together. The curled sections should answer the motion as a group. If one part bounces too tightly, it draws the eye. If one part hangs dull, it weakens the sweep. You return to the bench and correct what the motion revealed. There is music in the process if you don't hurry to name it. Steam, draw, lift, rest. Steam, draw, lift, rest. But it is not a chant. It has variation, hesitation, and listening built into it. Some feathers need longer rests. Some need no second pass. Some need brushing before warmth. Some need to be left alone until the air changes. The rhythm is steady because you are steady, not because the materials are simple. The hardness of being a feather curler appears again in the scale of correction. Too little correction looks careless. Too much correction looks artificial. A good worker lives in the narrow middle, making decisions so small they may seem invisible. The eye must be trained without becoming severe. The hand must be confident without becoming rough. The mind must be present without tightening around every detail. You can feel when you are tightening. The breath becomes high, the shoulders rise, the thumb presses too firmly. When that happens, you pause and set the plume down. Perhaps you wipe the blade. Perhaps you turn to wrap a finished piece. Perhaps you look at the street for one long moment, watching a cart pass below with its load covered in canvas. Then you come back. The feather has not gone anywhere. It waits better than the body does. The room's warmth grows as noon approaches. Gas or lamp heat, human presence, steam and sun through glass all gather together. Your hair near the temple may feel damp. The apron rests heavily across your lap. The smell of soap becomes fainter under the fuller smell of warmed feather and shop dust. Someone opens the window a little, and the outside air brings in coal smoke, horse, and the damp mineral scent of the city. The feathers react subtly. A little more air helps them dry. Too much draft may disturb light pieces on the table. A worker places a paperweight near a stack of slips. Another shifts a tray away from the window. These are small adjustments, made without fuss. A workshop survives by noticing conditions before they become problems. The St. Louis Feather Room is no different from a bakery, print shop, or laundry in that respect. It has weather inside it. When the noon hour finally nears, your current plume is almost done. You do not want to leave it mid-curl if the next step requires memory. So you finish the section, let it cool, and place it in the half-done tray with its note. The act of stopping well matters. Work paused carelessly becomes harder work later. Work paused thoughtfully waits like a bookmark. And as the noon pause arrives, the feather curler's bench grows still for a little while, though the shapes of the morning remain in the air around it. The noon pause has a softness of its own because the room does not truly empty all at once. Chairs scrape back in little stages. Someone finishes wrapping a parcel before rising. Someone else covers a tray with tissue, not tightly, just enough to keep dust from settling while the hands are away. You leave the feather in its proper place, and that small act lets the mind step down from attention without losing the thread of the day. Food tastes different after feather work. Bread feels solid, tea feels warm and plain. An apple, if you have one, gives a clean snap that wakes the mouth after hours of steam and dry fiber. You keep the meal separate from the materials, but the shop still clings faintly to everything. There is soap in the air, a little dye in the fingers, and the warm ghost of feathers in the sleeve, so even rest carries the morning with it. Conversation at noon often drifts where hands cannot. A sister needing new shoes, a landlord's repair not yet done, a church fair, a streetcar route that has been running late. The words are ordinary, and ordinary words are part of the comfort. In the 1890s, St. Louis Feather Room, most of life is not made of special events. It is made of small practical reckonings. A bit of food, a bit of pay, a bit of weather, a bit of work waiting under tissue. You may listen more than you speak. The body is still unwinding from the close focus of the morning. Your eyes rest on broader things. The cup, the wall, the window frame, the way sunlight lies across the floorboards. It is a relief not to judge each fine line. Even the crumbs on the table have a pleasant bluntness. Nothing about them asks to be curled or matched. When the pause is nearly over, the mind returns before the hands do. You remember the half-done plume. You recall the twisted stem and the group of stronger feathers waiting for fuller curl. The thought is not heavy, only present. A worker's day is often stitched together this way, with each pause holding the shape of what came before and what must come next. You rise gently into that shape again. The basin water is used, the hands are wiped. Any trace of food is kept far from the bench. You tie the apron once more, and the gesture brings you back into the trade. The chair receives you. The tools are where they should be. The feather you left at noon lies exactly as placed, which is a small kindness from your earlier self. You take it up and begin again. Afternoon work after food can be slower at first. The room is warmer. The body, briefly fed, would like to settle. But the feather curler's task asks for renewed delicacy, and so you let the first motions be simple. You brush out a plume that needs no hard decision. You wipe the curling knife. You sort a few stems by length. These small tasks act like stepping stones back into attention, and soon the harder work feels possible. The plume with the twisted stem waits for you now. You hold it to the light, remembering your earlier decision. It will not be forced straight. It will become useful by leaning into what it already does. You steam the fuller side first, then curl the barbs so the whole plume appears to sweep naturally. The stem's twist remains, but it no longer looks like a flaw. It looks like direction. This is one of the quiet satisfactions of the St. Louis feather curler's trade. You don't always correct by erasing. Sometimes you correct by understanding. A material tells you what it can bear, and you make room for that truth. The finished piece may be less grand than a perfect plume, but it will sit honestly on a hat, and honesty in small decorative work has its own form of grace. Across the room, someone laughs softly at a misread order slip, then corrects it before any harm is done. Paper moves, the kettle sighs. A customer below speaks in a bright voice. The words indistinct but the tone clear enough to tell she has come with hopes for something to be altered, renewed or made fit. Those hopes will travel upward soon, perhaps as another packet for your bench. The day keeps feeding itself. The feather in your hand begins to answer. Its fibers, once pressed flat from packing, now rise and curve with a loose fullness. You draw the last section along the knife and let the plume hang from your fingers. It trembles, then steadies. The motion is good, not showy, not stiff. It will do. You place it beside the others in its group, and the group looks more complete because of it. Afternoon light slides across the bench, and the feather curler in 1890's St. Louis returns to the part of the day where every finished piece must be made to belong with another. Belonging is harder than curling a single fine feather. A lone plume can be admired for its own beauty, but hats rarely ask for loneliness. They ask for arrangement. 2 plumes must balance across a crown. 3 must rise without quarreling. Smaller feathers must fill a space without making it look crowded. A feather curler may not assemble the final hat, but your work prepares the terms of that assembly. You lay several curled plumes in a row and study their heights. The tallest has a proud lift, the shortest has a better tip, one is fuller at the base. One opens beautifully along the outer side but thins near the stem. You are not judging them as failures, you are finding their companions. The bench becomes a quiet meeting place where individual feathers are grouped into something a milliner can use. This work is visual, but it is also tactile. You can feel fullness before you measure it. A plume that looks generous may collapse when lifted, while a modest one may carry itself well because the stem has strength. You lift, compare, set down, lift again. The repeated motion has the calm of folding linen, though the material is far less forgiving. Your fingers learn the weight of almost nothing. The color groups require special care. Under afternoon light, a black feather may reveal brown undertones. A brown feather may hold red in its shadow. Navy can lean toward purple or green. If the hat trim is already chosen, the feather must sit kindly beside it. You may carry a curled plume to another table, holding it near ribbon or velvet, then return to adjust a curl that seemed right in isolation but too lively beside the cloth. The room smells richer near the trimming materials. Velvet has a dry, plush scent. Straw hat bodies smell faintly of field and storage. Felt brings wool and steam. Ribbon smells of sizing, dye, and the drawer where it has rested. Feathers add their own warm lightness to all of that. A millinery room is a place where materials keep their histories quietly, even after being shaped into fashion. You work with a set of dark plumes intended to trim a winter hat. They have been dyed deeply, and the surface catches light only at the edges. Curling black feathers under uneven light is demanding, because the eye loses detail in the shadowed barbs. You tilt them toward the window, then toward the lamp, then back again. The curl must be read by silhouette as much as texture. Your hand feels what your eye cannot fully see. A black plume can look solemn, elegant, practical, or grand, depending on its line. For morning wear, the curl may need restraint. For a fashionable street hat, it may lift with more confidence. For an older hat being refreshed, it may need to look proper without announcing its repair. The order slip may not explain all this. Yet the shop's habits and the customer's history supply what the paper leaves out. You learn to read more than writing. Your thumb tires more quickly on dyed feathers. Perhaps the fibers have less softness. Perhaps the eye works harder, and the whole body shares that strain. You slow the pace. A tired hand tends to press unevenly, and uneven pressure makes a curl that wavers where it should flow. The work can feel like drawing a line you cannot erase, except the line is made in softness, and the erasure would be damage. There is a kind of humility in making decorative things carefully. Decoration is easy for others to dismiss, because it appears after shelter, food, and accounts. But human beings have always shaped what they wear, even in modest ways. And the small wish to appear tidy, respectful, stylish, or prepared is not foolish. You see that at your bench. A feather restored for Sunday wear may hold a customer's sense of dignity. A plume made fresh for travel may help someone feel properly equipped for a journey. The St. Louis feather curler works in that space between need and desire. Not the grand need of bread, perhaps, but the human need to present oneself to the world with care. Your labor helps that happen. The hat will be seen. The curve will be noticed, even if the worker is not. And in a quiet way, that is part of the bargain you make with the day. A pair of black plumes now lies ready. You turn them one last time. The curves match, but not too perfectly. Natural materials should not look stamped out. You wrap them together with enough air in the tissue that the tips do not crush. The paper closes around them with a sound like a soft wing. You mark the order and set it aside. The space they leave on the bench is soon filled by the next request. As afternoon begins to lean toward evening, the work changes again, and the feather curler's bench becomes a place of small repairs, last comparisons, and careful promises made to the following day. Repairs at the end of the day require a special kind of mercy. You are not at your freshest, and the feathers often are not either. A late packet may contain a plume bent sharply near the middle, or a spray that has lost its outward fan, or a piece brought in by someone who hopes it can be made decent for tomorrow. You cannot always make it new. You can often make it better. The distinction is gentle, but necessary. You open one such packet and find a pale grey feather with a kink in the stem. The kink is not clean. It has crushed some fibers around it. A strong hand might try to straighten it at once, but a strong hand would likely break it. You soften it first with steam, holding it where the warmth reaches the stem without soaking the whole plume. The smell rises, damp and faintly earthy, as the feather relaxes by degrees. The kink will remain a little. You know that before beginning. So the aim becomes concealment through curl and placement. You shape the surrounding barbs to give the eye another path. You strengthen the visual sweep above the damaged spot. You soften the lower section so the bend doesn't appear abrupt. This is work of disguise, but not deception in any harsh sense. It is restoration within limits, the way a mended cuff still belongs to a good coat. You imagine the hat it will return to, perhaps a grey bonnet with ribbon darkened by use, perhaps a customer's dependable piece rather than her finest. It may not appear in any window, it may never be admired by strangers, but someone will put it on and feel relieved that it can be worn again. That quiet relief is worth the careful minutes. Many trades survive on such modest salvations. Your hands move slower now, and that slowness is helpful. Evening doesn't favor speed. The lamp makes the steam visible in soft trails. The bench surface looks amber where the light touches it. Feathers cast shadows too fine to trust. You rely on touch, on memory, on the little bounce that tells you whether a curl will hold. The room feels hushed, not because there is no sound, but because the sounds have grown familiar enough to become background. A drawer opens behind you. Spools shift. Someone counts pins into a small dish. The pins make a dry, bright tapping. Far below, the shop door opens and shuts, letting in a moment of street noise and then closing it away. You can smell damp wool from a visitor's coat drifting up the stair. Rain may be threatening, or perhaps the river air has simply thickened. The feathers seem to notice, and the room's attention adjusts. Damp weather makes feather curling harder in a slow, persistent way. It softens what should hold and clings where lightness is needed. A curl that looked high an hour ago may relax if wrapped too soon. Pale plumes can gather a limpness that looks like fatigue. You learn to compensate without overdoing it, giving a little more shape, a little more drying time, a little more space in the tissue. The weather becomes another worker in the room, not always cooperative. St. Louis weather could shift with a stubborn inland mood, hot and heavy, cold and raw, damp along the river, dusty when streets dried out. Your trade does not take place outside, yet outside is always entering. It comes through windows, coats, delivery packets, and the materials themselves. A feather curler may sit at a bench all day, but the bench is never sealed away from the world. The world arrives in the air. The grey feather is better now, not perfect, better. You hold it at arm's length, and the damaged place no longer calls out. The plume has regained a gentle lift. You set it aside to rest before wrapping, because any repair near a kink needs time to show whether it will settle or fail. This patience at the edge of completion is one of the trade's deeper lessons. Let a thing prove itself before you trust it fully. Another order waits. This one is not a repair, but a request for a curl to be softened. A customer has found the plumes too springy, perhaps too youthful for the hat, or too bold for the occasion. So your task is not to increase shape, but to quiet it. This is delicate in a different way. Removing excess effect without making the plume dull requires a hand as careful as any first curling. You pass the plume through steam and let the tight sections relax. Then you redraw only a few tips, guiding them into longer curves. The feather becomes calmer. It settles closer to itself. You can almost feel the customer's face in the request, someone wanting to be well dressed without seeming loud. Fashion is full of such personal negotiations. The feather curler hears them not as confessions, but as adjustments in line, height, and movement. We remain at the bench because this is where the emotional life of the object becomes practical. Too high becomes lower, too stiff becomes softer, too drooped becomes lifted, too plain becomes lively. Behind each phrase is a person trying to meet the world. Your hands don't need to know the whole story. They only need to understand the request well enough to make it wearable. The softened plume rests beside the grey repair. The two pieces have nothing to do with each other except that both pass through your hands in the same fading light. That is how a working day gathers variety without drama. New feathers, old feathers, proud feathers, tired feathers, dark plumes, pale plumes, customer wishes, shop needs, weather, lamps, fingers, paper. The variety is held together by routine, and when the evening bell of the shop's habits begins to sound without ringing, the feather curler's attention turns to the last complete work that can still be done well. The last complete work must be chosen wisely. You do not begin a large matched set when the hand is tired and the light uncertain. You choose a task suited to the hour, something that can be finished cleanly, or something that can be brought to a sensible pause. Tonight it is a cluster of smaller feathers for a hat trim. Not grand plumes, but compact pieces meant to add texture near a ribbon. They need curling at the tips and a little freshening near the base. Small feathers can be deceptive. Because they are less dramatic, one might think they are easier. Often they are simply easier to ruin unnoticed. Their stems are shorter, their fibers give less room for correction. The curl must be tiny but visible, restrained but not absent. You hold each one close to the light and work with a smaller motion, almost as if shaping a thought before it becomes speech. The cluster has several shades of brown. One is deep like polished walnut. Another is warmer, almost chestnut. A third is duller, meant perhaps to sit behind the others. In the lamplight, the differences soften, so you carry them toward the window where the last outside light remains. The glass is darkening, but not fully dark. You see enough. The shades will sit together well if the curl gives them shared direction. You begin with the duller feather because it will be partly hidden and can help establish the underside. Steam touches it lightly. You shape only the outer barbs, encouraging them to lift from the base. Then the warmer brown, then the deeper one. Each piece is placed in order as it cools. The tray begins to look like a small fan of autumn tones, though you would not say it aloud in the workroom. You simply see that the colors rest well. The smell of brown feathers after steam is faint but distinct, warmer than black dye, less clean than white plume. It mingles with the wooden bench and the cloth under your wrist. Your fingers sense the difference in each piece. One has a slightly rougher shaft. One is smooth and easy. One resists at the tip. The job requires you to register all these facts without making a fuss over them. As you work, the city outside loses detail. Windows across the street become lit rectangles. People passing below become motion rather than faces. The feather room turns into an island of lamplight, with its trays, slips, tools, and careful hands. The day's earlier busyness feels far away, though it has led directly to this moment. Morning's sorting, noon's pause, afternoon's matching, evening's repairs, all of it has become the quiet handling of one small brown cluster. This is how long work softens the mind when it is not rushed. A task narrows, and within that narrowness there is room to rest. You don't need to think about all the feathers ever curled in St. Louis, all the shops, all the fashions, all the trade routes, all the hands before yours. You need only draw this tip once, then set it down, then take the next. The large world enters through small doors. The cluster is nearly ready when one feather slips out of alignment. It isn't serious. You lift it, steam the base very lightly, and place it again in the intended order. There is no irritation in the correction. Small things move. Small things are moved back. If the work teaches anything useful beyond hats, perhaps it is this. A patient return is often enough. You wrap the cluster differently from the long plumes. It needs support but not flattening. Tissue is folded into a shallow cradle. The feathers are laid with tips free of pressure. A second layer covers them. The parcel is marked with the order slip, and your handwriting, if it appears, is slower than it was in morning. That slowness suits the hour. The letters do not need elegance. They need clarity. The last complete task is done. You sit for a breath with both hands resting on the table. The bench is not empty, but it has changed. The urgent pieces are wrapped. The damp pieces are resting. The uncertain repair will wait for morning judgment. The tools remain, but their day's work is nearly finished. Around you, other workers make their own small endings. A chair leg shifts. A lamp is turned lower in one part of the room. Someone ties string around a stack of orders. Someone else sweeps carefully, not with broad strokes that send down into the air, but with controlled movements that gather the day's little leavings. The broom whispers across the floor. It finds threads, feather bits, dust, paper corners, and the soft debris of making things look effortless. The St. Louis feather curler's room at closing has none of the grandeur of a factory floor at shutdown. No great belts stop. No whistle splits the air. The ending is more like a breath released by degrees. A tray covered, a drawer closed, a kettle emptied, a blade wiped, a window checked. Each action is small enough to miss, but together they turn labor back into rest. And as the lamps are lowered one by one, the feather curler's thoughts move gently from what has been finished to what must be protected through the night. Protection begins with distance. Finished feathers must stay away from damp windows. Resting feathers must stay away from heat. Dark feathers must not shed against pale tissue. Fragile repairs must not sit beneath new bundles. You make these arrangements almost without words. The room has taught your body its map. Your hand reaches to the shelf that suits a half-dry plume. Your eyes find the safer corner for a wrapped order. The gray repaired feather is checked again. The kink has not returned sharply. The curve remains modest, which is all you asked of it. You do not wrap it fully yet. Morning can decide. You set it where nothing will touch the vulnerable place. This is a small act of trust, leaving something unfinished without letting it feel neglected. Many workers know that difference. It matters to sleep. The softened plume rests well. It has not sprung back into its earlier boldness. You wrap it now, gently, with a little air at the top. The paper folds over and lies smooth. A label goes with it. Another promise kept. You place it among the finished orders, and the finished row gains one more quiet parcel. The row has no pride, but you may feel a little steadiness looking at it. You clean the knife more carefully tonight because dark dye has left a faint trace on the metal. A cloth takes most of it. A little attention takes the rest. The handle feels warm from the day. When you set it in its place, there is a small sense of the hand being set down too. Tomorrow the grip will return. Tonight, the tool is still. The curling rod cools faster than the room. You move it only when it can be touched safely, and it gives off the last of its warmth into the air. The spirit lamp, if that is what the bench uses, is closed and checked. A gas flame, if present, is turned down and then out according to the shop's practice. The smell changes at once, losing the living heat of work and gaining the cooler scent of paper, wood, and dust. You cover the new plumes that do not need air. The tissue moves like pale water. Your fingers tuck the edges without pressing the feathers beneath. A plume under paper looks strangely absent, as if its softness has become only a slight rise on the table. Yet you know exactly where the tallest curve lies. You avoid it without needing to see it. That is what a day of handling gives you, a memory of shapes under cover. Outside, rain may begin, or perhaps it only threatens. If it does begin, you hear it first on the window, a fine tapping that makes the room feel more enclosed. Damp weather overnight will be considered in the morning. For now, the windows are checked. The feathers are away from the sill. The room has been given its best chance. You cannot command weather. You can only prepare the bench to meet it. There is a gentle humility in that limitation. The feather curler's skill is real, but it is not absolute. Material, weather, light, and time all have their say. You learn not to resent this. You learn to work alongside it. If rain relaxes a curl, you correct it tomorrow. If heat dries a piece too quickly, you soften it. If a plume refuses a certain shape, you find another. The trade is a long conversation with conditions. A final bit of down floats near the lamp chimney. It turns once in the warm air, then settles on the table. You pick it up and add it to the sweepings. The gesture is so small it might seem unnecessary. But after a day spent protecting fine surfaces, such gestures come naturally. Cleanliness is attention at its most practical. It lets sleep come without the nagging sense of something left carelessly undone. The floor is clearer now. The trays are in order. The papers are stacked. The stool is pushed in. Someone ties the refuse carefully so feather dust does not scatter on the stair. The room sounds larger with less movement in it. The walls hold the day's warmth a little longer than the air does. Your own breathing becomes easier to hear. The St. Louis feather curler's day is nearly closed, but we stay with the last motions because they are part of the same work, not an afterthought. You remove the apron again, and tonight its weight feels heavier than its cloth should allow. It has gathered the day in ways both visible and not. Feather dust, steam, posture, effort, the memory of the knife, the patience spent on color and repair. You fold it along the same lines as before. Folding is a simple act, but it gives shape to ending. It tells the hands they may stop. A co-worker may say good night, softly, or only nod. In a room built around concentration, speech does not need to do all the work of friendliness. Shared hours make their own language. You know who prefers the window open, who keeps pins in strict rows, who hums under the breath only when a task is going well, who grows quiet when worried about a difficult order. These small knowings are part of workshop life. The stairs wait beyond the door. Before stepping through, you look back once, not dramatically, just the worker's final glance. The bench stands under lowered light. The tissue-covered feathers lie still. The finished parcels rest in their row. The tools are away. The window shows only darkness and a faint reflection of the room. Nothing calls you back. That is the sign of a proper closing. Downstairs, the shop smells different after the lamps have burned for hours. Warm fabric, polished wood, coal smoke from coats, and the faint perfume of customers linger among the hats. Forms stand in rows, wearing unfinished ideas, and completed ones with equal stillness. A hat, trimmed with your afternoon's black plumes, may already be placed aside. In the dimmer light, the feathers have become part of the hat's silence. You pass them without touching. Once a feather leaves the bench, it belongs to its next stage. That restraint is another quiet discipline. The maker often knows the object intimately, yet must let it move beyond the making. You see a curl you formed, a small adjustment you chose, a repaired place cleverly hidden in the arrangement. The knowledge warms you for a moment, then settles. The street receives you with damp air. If rain is falling, it beads on sleeves and darkens the pavement. If rain has passed, the stones hold a mild shine under the lamps. Horses move more carefully on wet ground. Car wheels make a softer sound. The city smells of water, smoke, mud, iron, and bread cooling somewhere behind a shop door. After the feather room, the outside world feels broad and blunt and alive. You walk with the tiredness of fine work. It isn't the same as lifting crates or standing at a press, though it is no less real. It sits in the hands, eyes, neck, and middle back. It follows the small places of the body that held still so the fingers could move. Each step loosens some of it. The air touches the face, the shoulders lower. The city's larger rhythm gradually replaces the bench's narrow one. A streetcar bell sounds in the distance. You may walk toward it, or away from it. The rails gleam in the damp. People move under umbrellas, or collars turned up, their hats tilted against the weather. Feathers on those hats respond to the air, some drooping, some trembling, some held firm by good work and careful storage. You notice, because of course you do. The trade has trained your eye even when you are tired. One plume on a passing hat has been over-curled. It bobs too tightly with each step. Another, on an older woman's bonnet, has softened beautifully with wear. Not new, but dignified. You see these things and let them pass. The city is full of evidence of other hands. Tailors, laundresses, cobblers, printers, glovers, milliners and feather curlers have all left small decisions moving through the evening streets. There is comfort in belonging to that hidden company. Your work may be light in the hand, but it is not without place. It sits among the trades that keep a city's surfaces tended. The clean collar, the mended seam, the readable notice, the polished shoe, the hat made ready for weather and society. None of these alone is the whole story of a life. Together, they make the daily world feel cared for. The rain, if it is there, brings its own concern for tomorrow's feathers, but the concern is muted now. The shop windows were checked, the table was arranged, the damp pieces were placed wisely. You repeat these facts not as a list, but as a slow reassurance moving under thought. The room is as ready as you could make it. The rest belongs to night. Home light, when you reach it, seems steadier than shop light. It does not ask you to judge color. It does not require you to see a broken barb. It falls on ordinary objects: a chair, a cup, a folded cloth, a stove, a bed. Ordinary objects have their own kindness after a day among fragile ones. They can be handled without calculation. They hold their shape without your help. You remove your hat and see, perhaps, that its trim needs attention soon. Not tonight. Tonight it can remain as it is. Even a feather curler must let some feathers wait. You set it down where it will not be crushed, because habit follows you gently. Then you wash, eat, speak if there is someone to speak with, or sit quietly if there is not. The day unwinds in small domestic acts. The hands are the last to believe the work is over. They remember the knife. They remember the steam. They remember the exact pressure of curling a black plume under uncertain light. While you hold a cup, the thumb rests against it as though testing warmth for a feather. While you fold a cloth, the fingers avoid crushing an imaginary curve. Skill lingers in the body, and that lingering can be peaceful once the tasks are done. Night deepens, and the work becomes images rather than duties. A white plume opening in morning light, a row of dark feathers wrapped in tissue, a grey repair resting near the safer shelf, a brown cluster held in a cradle of paper. These images drift without needing action. They are soft enough for sleep. They have edges, but not sharp ones. And as you lie down, the feather room remains somewhere across the city, still and ordered, with tomorrow's work waiting under paper like a quiet breath held in the dark. By the next morning, the rain has left the streets washed and a little raw, and the St. Louis feather curler returns to a room that has kept its own weather through the night. The stair smells faintly of damp wood. Coats below carry the outside in. At the workroom door, you pause for the briefest moment, because a wet morning always asks the same question. How have the feathers held? The answer comes slowly, as answers in this trade often do. The finished parcels are safe. The covered plumes have not collapsed. The grey repair has softened slightly, but not enough to undo the work. The new bundle near the inner shelf remains dry. You feel a quiet gratitude toward last night's careful arrangements. They were small, almost invisible, and they mattered. The room is cooler. Damp air makes the feather dust settle differently, and the first smell of the day is less dry than usual. Paper feels a little softer under the fingers. The tissue has taken on the faint limpness that comes before true trouble, so you handle it with extra care. The kettle is set to warm, but you do not rush to add steam where the air is already heavy. The morning requires restraint of another kind. A feather curler must learn that the same tool does different work on different days. Steam that helped yesterday may hinder today. A curl that needed extra warmth in dry weather may need only the lightest touch when the air is damp. The knife is the same. The hand is the same. The conditions are not. This is why routine never becomes mindless, however repetitive it may appear from outside. You begin with inspection. The grey repaired plume comes first because uncertainty should be met early, while the eye is fresh. You lift it and watch the line. The damaged place has relaxed, but the disguise still holds. A little adjustment near the surrounding fibers will restore balance. You use almost no steam, only the warmth of the hand and a very gentle draw at the outer tips. The repair steadies again. It will not be perfect, and you accept that. The customer, if told properly by the shop, will understand that a damaged feather can be improved but not made unbroken. Or perhaps she will simply see that her hat can be worn. Either outcome belongs to the practical world. You wrap the plume at last, giving the kink more space than the rest, and the order joins the finished side. The damp morning slows everything. You lay out fewer feathers at once, because exposed pieces take the air too quickly. You keep papers close, but not pressing. You let warmed tools work gently without overcorrecting. The whole room seems to breathe in a lower register. Even voices are softer, as if the weather has padded the walls. Outside, wagon wheels hiss through wet patches in the street. The next task is a set of pale plumes for a spring hat, though the season outside may not feel spring-like. Pale feathers are unforgiving on a wet morning. They show handling. They gather limpness. They reveal every speck. You wash and dry your hands carefully before touching them. The towel feels rough against fingers already tender from yesterday. The first plume is lifted by the stem, not the body, and brought into the light. It has flattened a little overnight in its packet, but not badly. You coax it open with air and a soft brush before considering steam. The barbs separate slowly. The plume grows fuller without becoming lively. You hold it near the warmed rod, letting heat approach rather than strike. On a damp day, force would make trouble. Patience does more. The feather begins to rise. The St. Louis feather curler's bench is full of such weather wisdom, though it may never be written down. How paper feels when rain is near. How dyed feathers smell when they are too damp. How long a plume should rest before wrapping. How far from the window a finished order should sit. These are not grand facts, but they are the facts that keep work from failing quietly after it appears done. You curl the pale plume in broader motions, leaving the curve open. Tight curls would relax unevenly in damp air. A looser sweep holds more gracefully. Your thumb presses, draws, releases. The fibers answer with a soft bend. You move along the plume, not staring too hard at one place, because the whole line matters more than any single curl. When finished, it looks almost as though it has dried into shape by itself. That almost is your skill. The listener may rest inside that word. Almost natural, almost effortless, almost untouched. So many quiet trades aim for this kind of disappearance. The hand works carefully, so the result does not look labored. The feather curler, like the mender, the finisher, the polisher, and the typesetter, must often leave behind evidence only in the form of ease. The pale plume rests, and you begin another. Outside, the wet morning lifts slowly toward a grey noon. The light is even, which helps with color but gives little warmth. Someone moves a tray closer to the inner table. Someone else notes that the black orders can wait until the air dries a little. The room makes its adjustments. No one announces a change in plan. The work simply bends with the day. As noon approaches again, the damp has become part of the rhythm, and the feather curler's hands have found a slower path through it. This second noon feels quieter than the last. Rain changes appetite and speech. Bread is eaten more slowly. Tea or coffee gives off a welcome heat. Coats hang nearby, darkened at the shoulders. The room smells of wet wool from the stair, warmed water and feathers kept carefully away from too much moisture. You hold the cup with both hands for a moment, letting warmth settle into the joints. A co-worker may speak of a leak at home, or a muddy crossing, or a child who wanted to splash through every puddle. The talk stays low. Wet days draw people inward. You listen and watch rain trace the window, if it is still falling, or watch droplets cling to the glass after the rain has passed. Each bead distorts the city beyond it into a tiny wavering shape. After hours spent reading feather fibers, even water on glass can seem detailed. The break ends gently. Nobody is eager to throw the damp work into haste. You return to the bench and test the pale plume that had been resting. It has held better than expected. The open curl remains soft. You wrap it loosely, not for final delivery yet, but to keep it from the heavy air while its companions are prepared. A careful temporary wrapping is another small service the finished eye never sees. Now comes a task involving feathers already mounted loosely to a wire spray. They are not fully set, but their stems have been gathered for placement, perhaps by another worker who wants the tips curled before final arrangement. This means your handling must consider the group as a unit. You cannot treat each feather as entirely free. The wire adds structure, and structure adds complications. One careless pull may disturb several pieces at once. You cradle the spray in your left hand. The wire is thin and slightly cool. The feathers fan outward, uneven but promising. Some tips need lift, some need only smoothing. The base smells faintly of metal and thread, perhaps a touch of paste. You work from the inside out, because the outer feathers must not be crushed while reaching the inner ones. The order of motion matters as much as the motion itself. Each tip receives its small attention. Steam is applied sparingly. The curling knife draws only the ends, leaving the body of each feather natural. You rotate the spray and check the silhouette. A good spray should not look like a bundle of separate arguments. It should have a shared drift, a sense that all its parts have leaned together under the same mild breeze. Your hand supplies that breeze, slowly. The wire catches the light. The feathers tremble when you adjust the base. You wait for them to settle before judging. Waiting after movement becomes especially necessary with grouped work. A piece may look wrong simply because it is still moving. You learn not to correct motion that would have resolved itself. This is another form of restraint, and by now restraint is as familiar to you as the knife. The mounted spray takes longer than it seems it should. That is often true. Tasks that look nearly done may contain the most hidden labor. You must avoid disturbing earlier work while finishing later details. You must hold the whole shape in mind. You must keep the base clean, the wire unbent, the tips lively, the tissue ready. The final object will look airy. The process is dense with small decisions. In the afternoon, the air begins to dry slightly. The room notices. Paper crisps at the edges. Feathers hold their lift more readily. The workers relax without saying so. You can feel it in the pace. The kettle becomes useful again rather than risky. The window may open a little wider. Outside, wheels sound sharper on drying stone. The city has not transformed. It has simply shifted enough for the bench to shift with it. The spray is finished and placed in a shallow box, rather than wrapped flat. Cotton or folded tissue supports the base. The tips remain free. You check that nothing touches the freshly curled ends. The box lid will not close until the piece is fully settled. It sits near the back of the table, elevated from the ordinary traffic of hands. A small feathered arrangement, like this, needs room to become itself. And as the damp afternoon clears, the feather curler's work widens from single plumes into the careful preparation of ornaments that must travel safely through the shop. Travel inside a shop can be as risky as travel across the city. A feather can be perfect at the bench and harmed on the way to the counter. Someone may set a ledger too close. A sleeve may brush a tip. A drawer may open against a tray. Because of this, you think about paths, from bench to shelf, from shelf to stair, from stair to counter, from counter to box. Each path has corners, hands, and chances for pressure. You prepare a larger plume for just such movement. It is intended for a hat that will be tried on before final stitching, so it must be ready but not too firmly committed. The curl needs enough body to show the customer the effect, but the base may be adjusted later. You shape it with that future handling in mind. A temporary curl, if done carelessly, becomes a permanent problem. A good temporary curl leaves options. The plume is soft gray with darker shading near the stem. Its color suits the wet day, though the room is drying now. You steam the base lightly, brush the body, and curl the outer fibers into a long descending sweep. The tip turns inward, just enough to keep from looking ragged. You imagine it pinned against felt, perhaps with velvet ribbon, perhaps with a small cluster of darker feathers near the crown. The image guides the pressure of your hand. The feather's stem is wrapped near the base to protect it during fitting. You use thread or paper, according to the shop's habit. The wrapping must be neat, but removable. Too much binding stiffens the plume. Too little leaves it vulnerable. Again the middle path. Again the small decision that no one outside the room will name. You mark it for fitting and place it where the milliner can find it without searching. A worker from below comes up for it not long after. She carries the purposeful air of someone balancing customer time with workroom time. You hand the plume over carefully, explaining only what is needed. The base is temporary. The tip should not be pressed. It has rested only a short while. She nods. She knows enough to carry it properly. The plume leaves your bench held like a candle flame. After it goes, you turn to simpler tasks for a few minutes. Simpler does not mean careless. It means the mind can rest in known motions. Sorting small feathers by shade. Cutting away broken ends from pieces that may be used in minor trim. Brushing a set of black tips that will be curled later. The hands welcome such work after a larger decision. Repetition, when kind, can be restorative. The afternoon light returns more clearly now, and the window shows the city washed clean in patches. Roof lines are darker, brick looks deeper. The street below reflects less with each passing hour. St. Louis resumes its ordinary movement after rain. Delivery wagons, pedestrians, streetcars, shop messengers, all of them make the city feel like a loom, crossing and recrossing. Up here you continue the quieter weaving of curls and preparations. The gray-fitting plume comes back after a while. It has been tried against the hat and needs a higher lift at the back. The request is precise but not troublesome. You can see where the base angle changed. The plume has been handled well. No tips are crushed. You warm the lower curve, adjust the sweep, and strengthen the back section, so it will rise when pinned. The feather, already beautiful, becomes more useful. This back and forth is part of shop life. Work rarely moves in a straight line from raw material to finished object. It travels, returns, changes, and travels again. The customer may alter her mind when she sees the hat near her face. The milliner may decide the trim needs height. The feather may behave differently once placed against cloth. You do not resent the return. Returning is how the object becomes right. The adjusted plume leaves again, and this time you feel it may stay below. There is a small pleasure in that. Not ownership, exactly. More like having helped a sentence find its proper cadence. It will now be stitched, pinned, or arranged by other hands. Your part is folded into theirs. The hat will appear whole, as if no part of it had ever waited separately on a bench. By late afternoon, the feather curler's hands have touched so many stages of the trade that the bench seems less like one station and more like a quiet crossing place. New feathers cross into shaped ones. Old feathers cross into restored ones. Damp feathers cross into rested ones. Single pieces cross into arrangements. Your hands receive each crossing and make it orderly. The metaphor is gentle because the work is literal. A feather comes to you in one condition and leaves in another. The change is small enough to be missed and real enough to matter. There is also the crossing between body and tool. The knife by itself does nothing. The hand without the knife could not produce the same curl. Together, they form a habit. The warmed rod, the brush, the tissue, the tray, the lamp, each extends your care in a different way. A trade is not a person alone, and not a set of tools alone. It is the practiced relationship between them. The room's sounds grow sharper as the air dries. Paper snaps a little more when folded. The broom on the floor sounds less muted. Feathers rustle more clearly. Someone hums a fragment of a tune, then lets it fall away. The shop below is busier for a time, perhaps because rain has eased and customers venture out again. Voices rise through the stairwell, softened but animated. The workroom receives them without changing its pace too much. A late order arrives for white feathers to be freshened, and everyone knows white work near evening is not ideal. Still, the task is possible if kept modest. The feathers are not badly soiled. They need lifting, brushing, and a slight curl at the tips. You wash your hands again, dry them thoroughly, and clear the immediate bench. No dark scraps nearby, no dyed cloth, no loose pencil dust from order slips. White feathers demand a small clearing of the world around them. The first white feather is cool to the touch. It smells faintly of storage and perfume, perhaps from the hat box. You brush it gently, and a few fibers separate with a sound so soft it is almost imagined. The tip has flattened. You warm it with breath and nearby heat before using steam. Sometimes the simplest moisture is enough for the first persuasion. Then the knife draws the tip into a light curl, barely more than a lifted edge. White work brings the eye close. Every shadow appears like a mark. Every natural variation in the feather asks whether it is dirt, dye, damage, or simply structure. You learn not to panic at shadows. You turn the feather. You view it from another angle. You distinguish stain from depth. This calm looking saves needless washing, and needless washing can harm delicate fibers more than a small harmless shadow ever would. A pale feather under lamplight can flatter itself, so you keep returning to the window's remaining grey. The day outside is fading, but it still tells color more honestly than the lamp. The feather passes inspection. You set it aside under clean tissue and begin the next. The set is small. That is a mercy. Each piece receives the same care, and no piece is rushed because the hour is late. The hands are tired now in a way that has become part of the room. You do not fight it. You accommodate it. Movements become more deliberate. The bench stays clearer. Finished pieces are moved out of reach sooner. The knife is set down between feathers rather than held while thinking. Fatigue can be managed if it is acknowledged quietly. Pretending freshness would be more dangerous than being slow. One of the white feathers has a weak area near the base. You find it by touch before sight. The fibers there seem less anchored, more willing to separate. You decide it should not be curled near that point. Better a modest shape that survives than a prettier curve that fails. The order may allow this because the feather will sit partly behind another. You mark its position in your mind and shape only the safer tip. This judgment, repeated day after day, is part of why feather curling was difficult. It wasn't just making curls. It was knowing which curls not to make. It was protecting the material from the customer's wish when the material could not bear it. It was protecting the customer's money from a showy repair that would collapse. It was protecting your own tired hand from the temptation to finish by force. The small white set is completed at last. It rests like a quiet cloud under tissue. You label it clearly, because pale work can be confused if the room is busy. The paper slip is tucked safely. You move the set to the finished area, then clean the space again. Even the act of cleaning after white work feels like an exhale. The bench can return to its mixed colors now, and as evening comes on for the second time in our journey, the feather curler's world narrows once more to the lamp, the bench, the protected parcels, and the last decisions before rest. The last decisions are small enough to fit inside the palm. A wrapped order is moved a little farther from the window. A pale feather is given more space beneath its tissue. The knife is wiped once more, though it already looks clean. and the warm metal is left to cool in its familiar place. Around you, the St. Louis feather curler's room settles by degrees, not empty, not forgotten, only released from the pressure of the working day. You let your hands rest on the bench for one quiet breath before rising. They have spent themselves on lightness, on steam, on pressure so careful it could hardly be seen. Now they are allowed to be only hands again. The fingertips feel the grain of the wood, the faint roughness where years of tools have marked it, the ordinary steadiness beneath all that fragile work. The lamp is lowered, and the feathers lose their sharp edges in the softer light. Tissue becomes pale shadow. Parcels become sleeping shapes. The finished plumes no longer ask to be judged, and the unfinished ones no longer ask to be judged. They will wait in the room's still air, held away from damp, away from dust, away from careless weight, while the city outside moves into its deeper evening. You take one final look, not to begin anything, only to be sure the room can rest. The bench is clear enough. The tools are back where morning will find them. The curled feathers lie quiet, each curve held gently inside paper, each small labor folded out of sight. Beyond the dark glass, St. Louis has softened into lamps, rain-dark stone, and distant wheels. And now the work lets go of you at last, the feather room growing still behind you, the lamp dimmed low, the bench at peace, and nothing more needing your hands tonight.